do. Okay, Professor Tootle, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? Happy New Year.
Good. I'm doing Happy New Year. I think I don't know. As often people do, kind of reflect on the end of last year and think of the new stuff. And whether I don't really believe in resolutions, but I kind of do some most years, or at least think about things I should probably be doing better or whatever. So I've done that in public policy, and I want to run some things by you. And this will be kind of quick, actually. So try not to do an
Hmm.
hour-long answer on a 1 second question because I probably have 30 or 40 more questions. But if
Okay.
you want to, if you want to, that's fine if it's important. I'm kind of come to the conclusion that well, I don't mean this, so I'm being what is that, a devil's advocate. I'm not sure history matters. I think people are kind of, I mean, their own personal history about how their parents treated them or who was mad at them in the neighborhood or how they felt about a situation or something. It seems to me like most of us, and I try really hard at this, Professor, but it seems like most of us have a feeling about something we're observing, and then we kind of do a little superficial research. It used to be the Encyclopedia Britannica decades ago, and now we do a quick Google search and kind of pick up facts that bolster our opinion, and then we shout that out again. And if somebody that we admire and like disagrees with us, then that could probably change our opinion. But most of the time, we're trying to find people that already agree with our opinion and we just kind of argue about it. And so I'm a little concerned about whether history really means anything or whether it's just power and money like it's always been. Will you just give me a gut reaction to that?
Well, history doesn't have to matter. For most of human history, history didn't matter. We were ruled by violence and scarcity, and history only matters if you want to live a life of peace with other people, and prosperity and freedom.
Okay, I love that answer because you've alluded to that in lots of our conversations in the past, but I don't know if it's been so succinct like that. That's a really nice statement. History matters if
Yeah,
we want
you
peace.
we can have history doesn't matter if you want to just like have a society where people use violence to get what they want.
Okay, but but it doesn't even have to be violence. It could be threats of violence, or it can be lack of violence against yourself, and maybe it's violence against some other team. Don't aren't most of us, as long as we're fat, dumb, and happy, and I guess it can't. Neither of those are politically correct anymore. But I mean, if we're trying to live our own life rather than fat, dumb, and happy, we're trying to, and as long as our team is winning, and I'm able to have a family and a job and a hobby or something, then I'm lazy. You said you're lazy in the past and you have tenure. You can be courageous. You have tenure.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get beat up by a bunch of strangers arguing about public policy unless or caring about America unless I can do something, unless I can be effective. And if everything's okay, mostly okay, can't I just live my job? I mean, that's what most people do, don't they? Wouldn't they rather have an authoritarian just making decisions for them rather than making decisions on your own? It's a lot harder to be a democracy.
Yeah, but to continue the analogy of food, you can have birthday cake for a day, and you can even eat birthday cake every day if you want. But eventually, there are going to be some consequences from eating nothing but birthday cake every day.
Okay.
And yeah, you can not believe in history, not teach history. Don't You can think that it's not important, and you can probably get away with that for 20 years, maybe 30 years. But then
Well, but don't
civilization
most
is
people
back.
get away with it for their whole life? I mean, you're the one that, I mean, very few people have read a real history book. I mean, maybe you read a couple of chapters or a page or a paragraph, or you listen to the teacher in high school or maybe even college. But you're the one I think has said very few people read a real history book.
Right. But that's what matters is, do elite institutions still teach history? And then are regular people left with a spidey sense? Because what you need to learn from history is pretty simple, but you just have to believe that it's true. And hopefully it leaves normal people with a kind of tingling on their back of their neck when somebody says something that's really wrong.
Okay,
Um,
I love that too. My dad always had that. His was an eyebrow raise. But you're the one that said, sorry to keep putting words in your
yeah,
mouth
yeah.
today when I'm trying to remember from past conversations. We most universities aren't teaching real history anymore, right?
Right.
So where do we get this spidey sense, in your words or my dad's, eyebrow raise, if we're not reading history on our own? And by the way, I know there are history
Yeah.
books that sell a lot, and people are interested in history, but
But well, that's why we can end up with I think many Americans were sort of shocked after October 7th when they found out that um, most professors don't believe in truth, um, believe in racism and ranking uh, um, um, a kind of hierarchy of grievances, and then justifying the use of violence um, in in executing an ideology. And that can only happen when history has been purged from our elite institutions. So I would say, yes, all of this has been happening over the past, uh, I guess that, it's probably started in the late 60s, but uh,
well, that's my whole lifetime, late 60s. I mean, I was born in 66.
yeah, the first idea that we should really get rid of history started in the late 60s. And then um,
What do you mean get rid of history? That's a new. I haven't heard you say that before in that way. What do you mean?
replace it with things called, instead of the traditional academic disciplines,
Okay.
the traditional academic disciplines were all dedicated more or less to seeing different forms of truth and
Well,
exploring,
you're talking science and math and wrestling
and
naked.
philosophy and English. I think that you
You
make a
don't even get my
mistake.
joke. You won't even stop. You won't let me throw that
No,
in there.
because it's
Greco-Roman wrestling.
such a common belief that somehow um, math is different from poetry. These are all just human beings looking through different forms of exploring knowledge, fields of
Okay.
knowledge, leading to some kind of truth. And truth can be, I mean, the idea that somehow, um, you know, a, a, a poet is doing something different than a physicist, I would say they're doing the same thing. They just get to the part where you say, I don't know, at different times.
Okay. But you
Because
include.
even in every science, you get to the part where you say, well, I don't know, a miracle takes place or something. And then we're going
Right.
to, and so in every traditional academic discipline, you would be seeking truth, or if you don't like the word truth, you can use the big fancy word verisimilitude.
I
Uh,
haven't heard that one.
yeah, so let's just stick with truth then.
Okay.
And knowing that you're going to fail to achieve it, but you're going to advance human knowledge through this search. And then in the late 60s came the idea that was,
Hold on.
oh,
But remember what you're going to say there. But you mean everything: science, math, history, sport, music. You mean everything. In classics, you would study things both in your body and your mind, and you would learn and then say you don't know.
yep,
Everything. And then
yep,
you really think there was a big break when I was born?
yes. Well, there
Huh.
wasn't a big break. There was an alternative that found its way into um, um, institutions because of the number of people in the baby boom.
Fascinating. So I think you need to explain more on that.
Well,
Well,
because there were
explain
so
more.
many
What did
because there were so many college students hitting college all at the same time, they made
right?
demands of the university, and for the first time ever, the universities listened to them. And started adding these things that were not academic disciplines to academics.
But you're speaking code, aren't you? Sorry to be so devil's advocate today. Aren't you just speaking code? You're a conservative and you're mad at gender studies and African American studies and feeling studies and all this sociology and psychology and all this stuff made up science. You're just mad at liberals taking over.
No,
Okay.
I would say that right now I am defending um, conservatives, moderates, centrists, liberals, and leftists against an ideology that is against all of those things and has successfully driven all of those people out of academics.
Okay, so I didn't read the article, but did you? I think it was in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times. It was Brett Stevens, I think. Did you read the article about
No.
uh, uh, let's see, President Gay, um, and why she? The big question he said was, why was she even the president? She'd never written a book. She'd written very few articles over like 22 over 30 years. The question is not why she was fired, is why she was hired. You're kind of is that a symptom of what you're talking about, or is that just
Well,
too
I
quick?
haven't read the article, so I can't speak to
Yeah,
it, but it sounds ish. It sounds
yeah, yeah.
close to the argument I'm making. Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at that, and we'll bring it up in a future conversation.
Well, I
So
have
let
a
me.
problem with the here's the problem with me. Like after the 1619 project and then that large article that came out in The Economist about the New York Times. I will read Brett Stevens. I don't have any problem with Brett Stevens, but or John McWhorter or even David French, but
Right.
a lot of stuff from the New York Times doesn't cross over my desk these days.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Jake put the link in there, so take a look at it.
Okay.
Let me switch gears slightly and then go back to your answer and the theme because I really like what you're saying. It gives me things to think about. Big picture, and then I'm going to give you an example or two. Big picture, my spidey sense, I'll use your words instead of my dad's, is really up right now that we have potentially two or three world wars on a horizon that maybe we can't control. It may not be our decision whether we're going to go to war, and whether it's Iran or China or Russia, something weird with Korea. I doubt it's Venezuela or Cuba or something. But there's just a lot of weird stuff going on, including in our own country, how divided we are, and so my spidey sense is really up that we may be thinking we are having these conversations over the last few years on abortion and gays and civics and history, and then all of a sudden we may switch gears and going, oh my God, you're young enough, you may be drafted. I'm too old now, but I'm an officer. I could be pulled back till I'm 65. Oh yeah, and it sounds absurd in a way, except I'm an amateur historian. I'm very amateurish. But we do have wars all the time. And those folks that you've already alluded to in Israel, they were just living their life. They think they were going to go have coffee and make some money or go on a date or something. And the next thing, their whole world has changed, not for a day or a week or a month or a year, but perhaps generationally, their world has changed
Mhm.
in the way since it hasn't since the first wars since Israel was founded. So my spidey sense is really up. Do you agree with that for 2024, or do you think, no, John, people are lazy. We're probably not going to have wars. We just posture and you know.
Well, I could say we got good news, medium news, and bad news.
Okay,
Uh,
because
the
this is the value of a historian, right? You're going to
Yeah,
give me.
I mean, I guess the good news is something Harry Truman may have said because it was in oral history that might have been a little shaky, but something Harry Truman might have said is that essentially um, presidents make decisions, and I'm really paraphrasing here, but um, the reason why every president has gray hair is because all of the easy decisions are made before they get to you. And presidents have to make a guess. And presidents have to make guesses on issues where it's 51 to 49,
All right.
and you'll never know if you were right. And at any given moment, the world is a dangerous place with a dozen things that could blow up into the next world war. And good and thoughtful presidents, that weighs heavily on them. So in that sense, I guess the first part of my answer is it's always a dangerous world.
Yeah.
Um, the next thing that should make us a little bit worried is that because America doesn't seem to know who it is anymore, because we're doing our part to wipe away the history of the United States. And I'll also say this is somewhat overdetermined because of what's happening in big states. I'm often reminded that if you look at smaller states, they have remained relatively normal. They've fought a lot of this stuff for a long time. Um, so even like polling decisions and institutions of higher ed, they're not always indicative of what's going on actually in small town America or small state America. But the sheer number of people who live in, California and New York and Florida and Texas can skew our national numbers on all this stuff. Anyway, get back to the original. So in the sort of the middle answer is all of this stuff should be worrying to us if we don't know who we are or what we should be fighting for.
Okay,
Because
but we are.
how do you know which war to start or which war to not start if you don't
Right.
know what you're trying to accomplish?
But we're so divided, though, Professor. On I kind of feel schizophrenic in a way. I guess that's not a good thing to feel, but Colorado's a purplish state still. We're conservative fiscally and really libertarian socially. But in the prairie, just going 10 miles away from where my house is, you can find the ultra conservative for 100 miles in each direction. And if you
Yeah,
go 5 miles north with Denver or 20 miles to Boulder, you can find as liberal as you want to be and imaginable.
but we're not
And
divided by reality. We're divided by labels.
yeah,
It's if you present the same question
yeah,
in reality to a
yeah.
liberal and a conservative, their answers are gonna be, you know, just 2 degrees apart. It's if you begin using labels to describe these things. I was thinking about this because of there was a little thing that happened on Twitter between Elon Musk
It's one of
uh,
the reasons I want to have this topic. It
and
is really
Mark Cuban.
fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah, and Mark Cuban said, "What's wrong with diversity? What's wrong with equity? What's wrong with inclusion?" And the answer is nothing's wrong with diversity, nothing's wrong with equity, and nothing's wrong with inclusion, the way
yeah.
that Mark Cuban defined it in his tweets. But that's not what Elon Musk was talking about, and that's not what DEI is. So what I'm sure if those two guys were sitting down and facing exactly the same problem within their business structures, they would probably solve it the same way if it had anything to do with actual diversity, actual equality, and actual inclusion. But we mean different things by those terms. So if you said to somebody like Mark, I bet if I presented these things to Mark Cuban and Elon Musk and said, we have a real problem with uh, um, we're getting too much groupthink, and they'd say, "Oh well, let's bring in some expertise in order to really challenge our beliefs," and they would both come back with the same answer. And then if you said, we've got a real problem, the best people are not being promoted, and they'd say, "Oh well, we need to address our systems to make sure that the best people are being promoted." And if you asked Mark Cuban and Elon Musk, "Hey, we've got a real problem in our business structure here. Um, the people who work here are having a difficult time thriving within the culture," and they would say, "Okay, well, we need to address that." So they have no difference of opinion about um, what the actual word diversity means, what the
Right.
actual word equality means, and what inclusion actually means. They have no different disagreements. DEI doesn't mean those things. Uh, if it's an ideology that is, here's where the difference is. Now, if I were to pose the same question to Elon Musk and Mark Cuban and say, "Hey, I've got this great idea. Um, let's make sure that we use all of our institutional power to make sure to impose an ideology on our workers." They'd say, "What? What? Are you crazy? Like, we can't do that. That's illegal and unconstitutional and insane." And somebody then said, well, I've got this great idea, and it's going to be that one group of people within your organization are going to, by race, give power to one group of people. And they would both recoil in horror and say, what? We can't do that. And then if somebody said, hey, I've got this great idea, we should make sure that anyone who disagrees with us keeps their mouth shut. And we fire them based on secret thoughts, so that we will have a climate of fear in this organization. And they would both say, what? That's not what we want for our business at all. So in that sense, like, get past the labels, get past the words. I mean, remember in our conversation that we had with Hiram Lewis a few weeks ago, he said, go granular. Get past these labels that make us think that we have differences, and instead describe the concept that you're actually trying to implement. And what you'll find is that people don't disagree. It's only with using words to mean things that really doesn't mean, that we've gone so far astray.
Well, and Dr. Seuss has a whole book on this too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we can go really deep with Plato or something, or we can go to Dr. Seuss.
Right.
We got three different conversations going on. I'm not sure which to spend most time. Plus, I want to hear from Tina and Bart and Jake and Steve, whoever else is on. Let me make sure I weave this thread together a little bit. The
Yeah.
war, possible world wars. We had good news, bad news, and neutral news or something. You didn't quite finish your thought on that. Then we'll go back to the DEI thing for a second. Where are we on the war? Yes, our spidey senses.
We should always have our spidey sense up, but I think we should always, and the reason our spidey sense should be up particularly is that because we can't really count on elite institutions to filter our news intake the way that we could in the past.
Okay, well, that's another topic I wanted to talk about today too. Individual citizen. Let me just talk about it then, I guess.
Yeah.
Individual citizens. You're a college professor. I'm a whatever the heck I am. And actually, I'm kind of thinking of some things I want to do with the remaining years of my life. So maybe I'm going to be something different this year versus my last 57 years. Um, I think we have a tremendous amount of influence in the world. Now, I'm not sure about Israel and Hamas or Russia and Ukraine, how much I can do, or how much, if you and I partner, how much you and I can do. We could probably do a lot. But yeah, God, there's 7 billion people, and I don't know how much we can do. But I have this like core philosophy that you just can't shake me off of, that we have like a responsibility, an opportunity, a privilege, a need, a desire to give something back to the world, to make a difference in our lives, to have meaning. I just think that, and it's not me, not one John Bracken, not one Stephen Tootle. It's everybody should take little parts of their lives and make a difference in other people's lives and their community and their state and their nation and the world. And we should fight about those things. We should have this clashing of teeth, not physically fight, almost hardly ever physically fight, but we should fight about them. We should use our words. We should sue each other. We should make positive differences in the world. Am I wrong? Or, I mean, does individuals change history, or do you have to be some like rich, powerful, born to a rich, powerful person to make history? What are your...
No, individuals absolutely make history, and you'd be shocked when you go back and read history books how few people were involved in many of the great events that you've learned about.
Because a lot of people are just plowing the field, right? So
Yeah. And most people don't care about stuff until it lands on their doorstep. And you can't really get a lot of people to care about something until it lands on everyone's doorstep all at once. I mean, and that's why, in essence, getting back to the baby boom, that's why the baby boom was a generation of young people that everybody had to care about, just because there were so many of them. It wasn't because they were brilliant or that they had any new insight or new ideas that any other group of young people had ever had. It's just there were so many of them.
So the circumstance. That's another whole train of thought. Let me try two more disparate things, and then you're going to tie it all together. Then we're going to open up to other questions and
Okay.
answers.
I love this part.
We have a pretty good skill at it. So, two different disparate things. I'm trying to figure out how to understand what actually happened. So, let me give a specific, and it's very personal. That's the reason I can speak somewhat authoritatively on this, probably more than most of the 7 million people in Colorado. Maybe there's 50 or 100. But Mount Evans, I know it deeply. I've been there. I hiked it. I camped it. I've run up it. My grandfather's ashes are scary there. My mother's ashes are scary there. My dad's ashes are scattered there. I'll be scattered there. And for the last month, instead of working on deep thoughts and war, I've been working on a puzzle that my daughter, a picture that I took of Mount Evans, where they're scattered, and it's a 1,000-piece puzzle. And I wish I would have known it was a 1,000-piece puzzle. I would have given her a different picture. This is really hard. Too much grays and whites and
Yeah,
real
yeah.
subtle. It's really a hard puzzle. Anyway, I know Mount Evans deeply, and I haven't gotten really into the debate because I don't care. I mean, I do care about whether Shivington murdered a bunch of Indian children and wives and out on the prairie, and whether Territorial Governor John Evans encouraged that, ordered it, supported it, forgave it, was involved in it. I truly have not read those documents. I guess there are some documents. And so they changed the name because liberals, for lack of, I know we shouldn't label people, but for lack of a better word, politically correct liberals, I'm not, and I don't, and I'm being a devil's advocate, said we shouldn't have a person who is a really bad person, Evans, apparently. We should change the name to Blue Sky. And I happen to actually like the Blue Sky because Colorado is such a blue, and it's an historical name of the Indian tribes. And so I haven't gotten into this debate because, and the reason is personal. I I don't want to argue about where my parents and where I'll be. I don't want to Blue Sky, call it that. I don't care. Matt Evans, call it that. This is their place of death. I don't want to get into the argument. And so I have a kind of an opinion, but I don't even care about the opinion. I truly don't. This is too personal for me. It's a sacred place for me and my family. But should I do care at some point? I don't think anyone's read those documents, Professor. Is Evans a horrible, evil, racist murderer? Or was he trying to protect white settlers and somebody went overboard and things got out of control? I truly don't know. So I'm trying to figure out how to take a specific example in Colorado and something like Putin and Zelensky in Ukraine and Russia, or Hamas and Israel, and renaming of monuments in the Civil War. I mean, all these things we fight about. How do we use history to discover the truth when I don't even know whether it should be Mount Evans or Blue Sky? And in a way, I don't care. So, can you give some just general guidance to us all on how to live a better life and how to make a difference in the world?
Well, yeah, Jake, get your Calvin Coolidge typing skills. Find that business in the free press, Calvin Coolidge. Um, I'd say the answer to all of these things is to cultivate the habits of the open mind. Decide what is a fair way of evaluating evidence and answering these questions before you go and uh, do whatever research you're going to do. And here are the questions that you kind of need to ask yourself, which is, do I think that a human being is the worst thing they've ever done or the best thing they've ever done? How do you weight specific activities that how do you judge the life of a human being? Because you know that every human being is flawed. And so, this is the kind of uh, the way that I would say you should rank this kind of stuff is say to yourself, well, before I answer this question, I'm going to look for evidence first and then create a story based on the evidence. um, before I even approach the question of what do we name, a mountain. Um, what is the whole life of Evans? Uh, and say to yourself, well, I'm not going to act until I have told myself the whole story of Evans. Not because and in a way, it's kind of the difference between, it's why fact checking doesn't work. I was thinking about this earlier, like when you write for a magazine or a journalist, um, editors will fact check, but what they fact check are your individual facts. And if all of your individual facts are correct, they will say, we have fact checked your article.
Right.
But what they don't fact check is whether you have put all of those true facts together into a true story. Because you can tell a lie by telling a lot of small truths. So, I mean, that's why I would say and yet another reason why you need to learn history is so that when somebody tells you a lie based on a bunch of small truths, again, that spidey sense will tingle and say, I think you're telling me a lot of small truths in the service of a big lie. So, and so you have to have that base of knowledge in order to know that somebody's trying to tell you something that isn't true. But the other thing about the habits of the open mind is that when you take the whole story and then you can begin asking questions of the story, and then it will be obvious what the answer is. In other words, you can say, well, you know, Evans did this, and that is unforgivable, even within the context of his own times. You know, how did he compare to other leaders of the time? How did he compare to other? This is I mean, if we're trying to be fair to him, we'd say, well, how did he compare to other Western governors? How did he compare to other, regional leaders in the world? Was he worse than, somebody in Mexico during the same time who was in charge of the same square mileage? How did he compare to the person who came before him? How did he compare to the person who came after him? And then you have a kind of a context in which to judge the individual acts he may have committed. I was thinking about this because there are all of these examples of people who are mostly good, but have a couple of issues where you're just like, oh, wow. And then there's that, Ulysses S. Grant, lashing out at Jews in the middle of the Civil War. Or trying to think of Eisenhower, letting the people of Hungary die while they when they rose up against Soviet oppression. And you have to say to yourself, okay, well, where does that fit in? The harder ones tend to be, to me, people like Richard Nixon, where the highs are very high and the lows are very low.
A lot of both.
Yeah, on both ends of the scale. Henry Ford, where do you put like a Henry Ford? But in terms of like
Elon Musk.
Yeah, right. So, and here's the other thing that you I would say, let's decide this issue before we apply it to a specific thing. And let's take like Margaret Sanger and whoever Mount Evans is named after, and say, like, are we applying the same standards to her that we're applying to him? Or how about, Martin Luther King Jr. taking money from communists, threatening the whole civil rights movement, approving of and maybe participating in sexual assaults? Like, does that mean we don't build a monument to Martin Luther King Jr.? Do we stop admiring the moral power of what he accomplished?
So Professor, two big reactions to that, and boy, you're on a good theme, so I'm hesitant to interrupt, but I've got to finish these two and then open it
Yeah.
up. Two reactions to that. The one is does seem to be a whole movement to say, well, it doesn't matter about Evans and how he related to all other Western governors or the time. They're all colonizers. They're all bad. They shouldn't have done what they should have. They should have just stayed back in their home country or in their homeland. Stop abusing cultures and so stop. The whole thing's bad. And
Yeah.
so
But that's the
and
anti-history position, right? That's the anti-complexity position. This is where
uh-huh.
we say stop learning about how human beings actually are.
Yeah. Cool. So thank you. Good reaction. And then there was another one I listened to. I guess they're renaming all birds. And I don't know if that's worldwide, but I guess there's a bird naming association that has some authority. And the birds mostly were named after the first person that discovered them. But then they've discovered that some of these bird discoverers were really bad people, or at least had some bad actions. So now they're saying, let's just get rid of all the names. We should make it the yellow bird because it's a yellow bird rather than the Brackney bird. And so I don't know. I kind of feel like the same way about Evans or Blue Sky. You, do we not name anything about anybody? I mean,
Let me also throw this out. What problem is it that you're trying to solve? And how does doing this solve that problem if you were really working from big to small?
okay. Why don't you say that again? Because
So,
it's a
I,
God.
for all of these things, I'd say, what problem is it that you're trying to solve?
Well, we're rewarding
But what is that? Where does that get us?
it makes us feel about it better.
Yeah, but what have so I would say, like, what are you actually accomplishing? Uh, I
Well, I don't
mean,
want a bird named after some racist or whatever then every time I see that bird, I have to think of the racist. It's the same thing as the Southern Confederate monuments. And you've made a pretty persuasive argument that we should get rid of most of those monuments, if not all of them.
I would say there's a big difference between having a monument to slavery in the town square and the name of a bird no one has heard of. Like, and again, this is what are you hoping to accomplish? And where does this get us if you're working from big, if you really want to work from big to small? You know, like, I don't know if it's, you know, if 2/3 of Americans don't know that we have three branches of government, what are you accomplishing when you rename a bird?
Yeah. Well, and this could just be NPR's reporting on, I mean, somebody cares about birds. And so, they
But
found out that,
let's just take in the comments, right? Tina Hamilton says justice for Native Americans. I say, okay, I want justice for Native Americans too. Let's work from big to small. Like, let's think about what's actually best, and I'm going to define best as being what do they want for themselves, and how can we live in peace and harmony and help any group of people get what they want out of life. And I bet if you spoke to them, renaming birds would be pretty low on that list.
no, but apparently Mount Evans was one of them. And I get it's right under Squaw Pass, and I could see how that would be offensive. I don't particularly like honky, or there's some other word for whites that I don't doesn't particularly like. In fact, I saw a friend of mine on Facebook post that hey, there's blank, all these blanks, and I had to look it up because I've never heard of it, but it's a disparaging term towards whites, and I was kind of affronted. I was pissed at my liberal friend for disparaging me, and then I went, I don't care. I mean, I don't like it, but who cares? I'm not going to respond to it. I don't care. I guess I shouldn't have even brought it up today. There's lots of things I have to worry about. That's not going to be one of them, but I don't like it. So I don't know. Okay, I've taken too much time. Tina, you don't have to take yourself on video or put yourself on video, but if you would at least consider taking your mic off and ask an important question or two of the professor. You had a comment on books or something, and you don't have to, so you can remain silent or you can keep typing. I just want to give you that opportunity. And I'll give you another 5 or 10 seconds to see if you want to jump on that opportunity. Feel free to jump in again in the future if you do, and maybe you're typing something. Bart, Jake, jump in before I keep dominating this. Jake, do you think I'm a madman? I mean, ask don't answer that question. Ask something for the professor under this context, because really, what I'm trying to do, professor, is prioritize my public policy time in 2024, because we can't even agree on whether January 6th was an insurrection, an attempted coup, or it was a weird riot or a peaceful thing. Maybe it was a party. I don't know. We have the whole spectrum, and we can't figure out Mount Evans. We can't figure out January 6th. We can't figure out the war in Hamas and Israel. Everybody has these opinions that they're so diehard that we can't seem to solve problems effectively anymore. That's my big concern. And I want our time together to be effective in the next year. And we can either do more of these or less of them, depending on that answer of how we maximize our individual ability. That's what all this is really about. So, Jake, before you called me a madman, that's my hidden agenda. Jake, do you have anything to add to this conversation? Or Bart? Go ahead, Jake.
Because I mean, the topic of the conversation is, does history teach people to be effective? It depends on what people you're referring to. Most of the people that I spend my time with are high school students who are going to be in college by August, so they will be voting adults. And based off of what I hear from my students and from their parents, when their parents call me and email me to complain about how I'm teaching, I have been told flat out by parents and students that they do not care what I teach them. They only care about the grade. And so in terms of like getting people to care about history, I am openly being told by people that they don't care what I teach them anymore. They just want a good letter grade for their GPA so they can get into college. And
it could be both or neither, right? I mean, they do care about that and they do care about history, but not in this setting. The grade is more important.
Well, no, my students don't care about history. I have maybe one or two students out of close to 200 that care at all, even though I have them read current events and I let them know, like, okay, this foreign policy that we're talking about with, Israel and Ukraine and Taiwan, we could potentially have World War III. And then I'll go over to an 18-year-old in my class and I'll start tapping on their desk. And it's like, do you want to be drafted and sent over to Asia or Europe to die? Because if World War III breaks out, you're going to be drafted. So have fun.
Well, and Jake's right. I mean, you think about the very special and unique challenge that a high school or junior high teacher, it doesn't have to be a history teacher, faces, in that somebody who's aged 10 to it's different for boys and girls, but let's just say from preteen up through someone who's in their mid-20s, they care more about identity shaping and comfort than content. And so what institutions can do is create in people, and I mean, families have to do this and schools have to do this, and get back to Coolidge, create the habits of the open mind where what you care about is the content and getting it right. But Jake and no other single teacher can do it alone, because if you've got a bunch of people walking in your door who all believe in credentialism, saying like every other part of my life is based on credentialism, and you're the one person who's saying you don't care about credentialism, well, that makes Jake the outlier. That makes Jake the person who's causing the problem. And that means that he is going to catch an inordinate amount of flack because you can't do it alone. I mean, at my own college.
You said you're lucky, Professor, that you have this little ecosystem where all your professors seem to care and you're supported by the administrators. Not the whole system, but your college.
Yeah. But I can tell you that every single week, every semester, it's the same fight over and over again. And with the same people who want the same result. And if you don't, and you cannot do it alone, you will be crushed and ground down and you're going to quit and leave your job. And that's why, that's how higher education was purged, is because you can't be the one person out there on an island. Because here's the reality, like, I can have the world's greatest history class, but if Pearson, the big book publisher,
Yeah.
gives to uh, history professors on 117 campuses a product and sends them on a vacation to Florida, hey, why don't you come and check out our online product, right? And then the state of California says anybody in the state who wants to take any class can take any, class from any campus for either for free or for $100. And all you have to do is log on and hit C over and over again, or upload a paper created by AI, and then you'll get an A in this class. What do you think everybody in society is going to do? They're going to take the online class that requires them with iterative grading for the multiple choice questions and no AI detection for paper writing. And what do you know? Everybody in the state of California gets an A in history, but not one of them can write a paragraph on what caused the Civil War. But if you are the one person, congratulations, you're going to have 4 students, and they're all going to be confused, and administrators are going to be coming to you and saying, what's wrong with your class? You don't have the same success rate.
Professor, I think I've got your point, and Jake's, but I kind of sense that you're both pessimistic right now, but I don't think you actually are. I think it's tough, and the world's kind of aligned against you, but I don't know if you're both. I don't think you're both pessimistic. I think you're actually optimists, and you're
let me
trying.
try and tie this back to your earlier question. All right. Because I think I can answer this point and tie it back. Just because you don't believe in history doesn't mean that history doesn't believe in you. Like, you can only do something that is a big giant lie and a failure that will eventually collapse under its own weight. And so I think what Jake and I are saying is the reason we're pessimistic for right now is we see these houses of cards that people are building everywhere, and the wind is coming over. And we're like, hey, everybody, this wind is going to knock over this house of cards. So am I optimistic that this house of cards is going to, survive the next sneeze? No, I'm not. But I am convinced that somebody's going to eventually sneeze, and all of these cards are going to come tumbling down because we've studied enough history to know that the lie doesn't survive.
Okay, so
reality will set in.
let me ask the impossible, and then Jake, you get the second to last word. Let me ask this impossible question. I am pessimistic on where the world is right now in war, and really deep. I mean, just people saying, "Hell with it, I'm killing you," and so I'm pretty concerned right now. And history would seem to deem I'm right, that most people are willing to tolerate horrible violence as long as their side's winning. Throughout the history of the human race, we kind of default to violence. And I think you and I differ on that a little bit. I think you're more optimistic. I think this little precious experiment in peace called the United States of America is really rare throughout the history. And so if we don't fight hard enough,
There's
you
no
agree with
difference between us on that. Yeah.
Okay, well then we got to fight harder because I think we're vulnerable right now, both internally in America and externally. I think it's really a dangerous time. And history is the reason I think that. Now, I also have an opinion, based on anecdotal evidence, but it seems like everything I read would seem to this is a very dangerous time.
Yes. I don't think
Okay.
we can about that. Yeah.
Oh, damn. I was hoping you'd be a little more optimistic. Jake, you get it doesn't have to be on my topic, on anything else you want to ask, and then we'll go to Bart. Jake, finish.
No, yeah,
Okay.
just kind of. Sorry, I've only got a couple minutes till I've got to go
Right.
teach my next class. But I mean, Tootle addressed everything that I wanted to say. Like, for my students, my personal experience with them, they do not start caring about my class until it negatively impacts them. So right now, they are being negatively impacted by they don't care, they don't study, and then they bomb a test, and their grade goes down the toilet. So then they come to me and start asking questions. But I have, these themes of US government that I'm teaching them, for my education at Ashland. And I tell them, like, there's a purpose behind the political parties, and the political parties should be the one choosing the candidates. And, they're not doing it anymore. And that's why we have such bad candidates. I am just waiting until, we have such bad candidates who become president that completely hose over the country, even worse than Trump did. Okay.
Right.
And just kind of breaks the system. And then I will tell everyone, like, I told you so. And I have told you who you needed to vote for, like, principle wise. And I
Right.
told you how you could have fixed the system, but you didn't care because you were watching a TikTok video. And so, I mean, I don't know how long that's going to take, but I really kind of want like a House of Cards moment to happen so that we can do a reset.
Well, and I'll tell you why, Jake, you're right. But I'll also try to tie this back to something John said earlier, which is we talked about what happens if you eat birthday cake every day. But what Jake is describing is there is an upside to this. And that is like, hey, I've given you a bad grade on one assignment. And there will be some students who walk into your office and say, okay, how do we fix this? And then you get them to do it the right way. And what happens is that they come to understand, oh my goodness, this is valuable. This is great. Doing it the right way works. And like what I'm going to do is I'm going to jog in the mountains every morning, because that makes me feel better. And then you look at the people who are eating birthday cake every day and you're like, do I envy those people? How else can I do it the right way? But there has to be some consequence. And once there's some sort of a consequence, like doing the right thing makes your life easier. I don't know, having a lot of friends and family and keeping your word and saving money and exercising, like this is all stuff that makes your life better, but you just have to live a little while before you figure it out. Like watching TikTok videos and like imagine like eating pizza, doing whatever the current drug of choice is, and being on I don't know, all unhealthy habits all at once. Right? Like it feels pretty good for about 5 minutes, but once you start doing the opposite, you look back on that person and you say, I don't really want to live like that. I don't want that to be who I am. So
I've got your analogy, and it's a good one in context of how we need to engage with the
Tina
world.
had a question, so let's
Yeah,
not.
I want to go to Tina too, if she can take herself off mic now. She had a technical problem earlier. Tina, you with us? Yeah, you are. Ask your question, whatever topic it is, Tina.
Oh, great. I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation. I'm not sure how worthy I am to be a part of this conversation.
You are.
But thanks. So I was a teacher in South Central Los Angeles in Koreatown, actually, and I have about half Korean students, half Hispanic students, maybe a couple African American students. But the history books that we had, we couldn't afford to buy the next year of history books for our students. So I had the new teacher's manual, and the students had the year before, maybe probably 10 years before, actually, before they could afford to buy it, history books. And I was teaching fourth grade, so that was California history. So we're learning about the missions, and my teacher's manual was so different in perspective to what the students had in their books that I did a lesson for the students where somebody went out of the room and the students and came back in and did something. Students had to write it down, right? And then we read everybody's eyewitness reports and how nuanced they were, different or opinionated they could have been with backstory. And so I'm just wondering, have history books always been so agenda laden? And how do you know if they were or not? Does that make sense?
Yeah. The answer is yes. But it doesn't have to be that way forever. In a way, the beginnings sort of, let me put it this way. There's a good version of the kind of all of the things that when they come together create this bad ideology and agenda driven. Because here's let me give you a good way that you can say to yourself, hey, let's look at this history book and ask ourselves, is this person pretending that they know everything? That's bad. Is this person neglecting the experiences of non-elites, however you define that? And maybe we should have some more diverse perspectives represented. Maybe we should recognize that for some people in American society, they don't just face one challenge, they face multiple challenges. And do we also understand that when people are experiencing pain and oppression, that they often express themselves in ways that are outside of the law and what civil society would normally allow? You know, those kinds of questions should be applied to the teaching and studying of history. The bad version of all that stuff is what we described earlier in the podcast. So, I'd say it was good that we finally had a history book about Ulysses S. Grant. For most of my life, I got to make this joke that the last book about Ulysses S. Grant was written by William Heseltine, Stephen Ambrose's advisor, and it was published in like 1932. And it was like, oh, great, we're finally getting some books about Ulysses S. Grant. So it's good, to revisit these old topics. It's just bad when it becomes agenda driven in a worse way. Like it was terrible when Southerners, I mean, they don't stop, and I shouldn't just say Southerners, but let's just say racists instead of Southerners. But when racists dominated the fields of history and twisted our historical memory in ways that were really terrible, there was this sort of like moment when it seemed like we all agreed that was a bad thing and that we should rewrite our history books. The problem is when you go too far, after you've accomplished the goal, and then you just keep going. It's like you're filling up the gas tank on your car, and once it's full, it's full. You don't need to keep pouring gas out in there once the tank is full, and you're not actually doing anything. You're not doing anything good by continuing to pour gasoline out the side of your car. You need to fill the tank when it's empty, but you don't need to put $300 worth of gasoline into the side of your car. Does that make sense?
Professor, let me, and then you can do a follow-up, Tina, if you'd like, and then we got to go with Bart, then we're going to finish. A follow-up. This is real world stuff. My preferred candidate right now, I don't adore her, but I think she's got a lot of good stuff going, and I might be able to vote for her. I don't know, is Nikki Haley. But boy, she blew it on that question. It was pretty bad. And it's exactly what you're talking about do we understand history, or do we have to cater to a whole group that doesn't understand history, but they feel adamant about it? I mean, it's yikes. Why do we have to be so stupid in 2024? I don't get it.
I heard Jonah Goldberg repeat something that I thought was kind of funny, and it was some other academic said it, but he said there's if you're asked what the cause of the Civil War is, the easy, simple answer is slavery. And it's only the middle brow who says, oh, it's complicated. And then once you really study it, you say it's slavery. You know, so it's only with the confused middle brow people who know a little bit who and I guess that's why I've always liked the word sophomore or sophomoric. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, you have a little bit of
it's like
experience
you
under
know
your belt.
just enough to say to get things wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's my life. Boy, is Jonah a smart guy. I'm glad we both know him. All right, Tina, do you have a follow up, or is that good enough for today? Hope you join us in other conversations. But do you have a quick follow up? Are you good?
I'm
There you
good.
go.
That was a really helpful iteration. I like your perspectives and the way to express how I agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, and we have like 80 of these shows. They're all on Spotify and YouTube. If you'd like to look at anything from abortion to gays, you'll find all sorts of stuff you agree with us on, and lots you'll disagree with. Thanks for being here today, Tina. Bart, why don't you close us off with the last comment or question, then Professor Tootle will end us.
I think yeah, thanks, John. I think this was a fantastic conversation. You guys have, I personally believe history is really, really important. You know, and like everybody in various controversies we've had recently, people have talked about, oh, we need to worry about the context of stuff. Well, history is actually your context most of the time. And, you know, that's why I think it is so important, you know, and that's really the only comment I've got, to be honest.
Well, and that's why I like these conversations that we have. It's also like why I like some of the professor's writings. Professor, your treatise, and it's just an essay on the monuments. Changed my opinion on monuments. I didn't particularly care about. I mean, we're in Colorado. I don't care about the monuments one way or the other. And I grew up watching Dukes of Hazzard. I don't know. There was a Confederate flag on the car, old General Lee or whatever it is. I wasn't like against the Confederate flag. I don't know. It's just a TV show. So your context of understanding the monuments and when they were placed and what they mean and why they were placed, actually changes my mind on it. Now I'm against the recent installation of monuments during the civil rights era. Well, cool. And so it was helpful. You actually can change my mind on things. So thank you for that. James Oak's book actually changed my perspective on the founding of America, which was really interesting. It's a long, semi-hard read, but it's an enjoyable read. It's not a hard read.
And it happens to me too. I mean, I'm, you know, over winter break, I try to get a lot of reading done. I'm halfway through this biography of Samuel Adams by Stacy Schiff, and it's blowing my mind. You know, like so much in it is because it's an area of history that I didn't know that much about, but it's, gosh, it's really filling in some important holes, gaps in my knowledge. And I just feel this debt of gratitude to all these people who put in so much work to try to get it right. But they try to get it right by doing it this way. We look at all the facts and then we turn it into a story. And then how it affects the individual is really like, you know, up to you. You know, you're all going to learn different lessons from these true-ish stories, stories that are attempting to be true stories. And just to remind myself of, you know, Bart's comment, history should matter because we want to, well, let me repeat something one of my old professors said, David Harlan, in this book called The Degradation of American History, that he published, by the way, in the 90s. He said, we owe a debt of gratitude. We're in the red to the past. And that was something that he got from Martin Luther King, that we owe a debt to the people of the past. And they can give us this incredible gift that nobody else can give us. You know, there is no other path to wisdom. There just isn't. And learning about the complex and the flawed people who have come before us, what you learn is we're building this statue to a flawed person. Or we're not building this statue because this person was too flawed. or this idea is actually evil, so we should tear it down. But in every one of these cases, there are good people, there are bad people. Sometimes bad people do good things, sometimes good people do bad things. And our job is to learn about all of it and then try to be better tomorrow.
Lovely, lovely way to finish. It's I feel a personal mission, Professor, to do the utmost of my ability, and I don't want to do it all day long because that's tiring. I want to work on a puzzle sometimes, or go for a
Yeah.
run in the mountains. But I want to, whether it's immigration or whether it's the abortion battles we're having, whether it's the presidential election, whether it's war and taxes, all the substantive and somewhat minor stuff that we argue about. I think we should do it better. I think we should. I think we should be better citizens. And I know you and I can't change the world, but maybe there's some way that we can be maximize our effectiveness in 2024 during
Yeah.
all this chaos that's going to befall on us.
Think about
Yeah.
every expert we've had on this show. You know, we had the guy on who talked about critical race theory, who I think was an actual communist or Marxist, right? Or wasn't he? Bloodworth, Brasino, Katzum. Like, I don't agree politically with any of these people, but what we all have in common is the habit of the open mind. And that means that we can have a meaningful discussion with them because they can all be shamed and they all want to do the right thing. They all have a sense of honor. They all want to do the right thing. And they all have a personal sense of morality about getting things right. And anybody who's like that, we can have, let's bring them in. Let's talk to these experts and do better at everything.
Yeah, well, let's do better at everything. I love this. You did great as almost always. Maybe you've had an off show or two, but yeah, this was you had some really nice cut quotes from this one, Professor. Thank you for your time. Tina, thanks for joining us for perhaps the first time. Bart, thanks for your consistency. I know somebody's out teaching high school kids, so he had to log off. But for folks that listen to this in the future, you can find them all on Spotify or on YouTube. And Professor, we're going to continue into 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Great. We'll take a couple weeks off because of your professional responsibilities, but we'll see you in the end of January. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.